A footballing powerhouse with a long history of fielding iconic black players, a diverse fan base both in the streets and in the stands, and a symbol of identity and belonging for black Britons that has gone well beyond the borders of this sporting arena and North London. Arsenal's appreciation of the contribution black people have made to this club has been documented in Black Arsenal, a book curated by the Professor Clive Nwonka.
Black Arsenal is a way of thinking about how black people in London and beyond have found a kind of connection or infinity space within Arsenal as a club culture. I've been going to watch games at Arsenal for 10 years as part of my research, and there's a multiculture that you see organically in the stands, on the streets, outside the ground on match days that isn't replicated, I think, anywhere in the country. And that's to be really kind of, embraced and beholden. So I think whether it's, songs about Declan Rice or videos launching his signing or him talking about kind of jollof rice, all those things are kind of really kind of playing into what is already organic and evident there, which is Arsenal being an instinctively multiracial club, both, on the stands, on the pitch and beyond as well. And it's something that he's really kind of, I think, emblematic of London. London is the multiracial city, the integrated city. And if your club culture is mirroring what is on the streets, in our schools, in our playgrounds, in our working environments, that's the sign of a multiracial club.
You're not even an Arsenal fan, you're a Liverpool fan, aren't you? What drew you to Arsenal on this project?
I'm someone who obviously grew up in North West London, and I'm always going to appreciate what people around me appreciated. So I would go to the barber shop on a Saturday morning as a young kid, and all the black men there talking about Arsenal. Now for me, obviously coming through as a young one, to be involved in Black Talk had to be about being involved in Arsenal. Talking about Ian Wright or Kevin Campbell, that was me grappling. Like, I appreciate John Barnes, but he wasn't Ian Wright. And people weren't talking about John Barnes in the same way in the early 90s. It's about Ian Wright, it's about him doing a bogle on the pitch. Can I kick it? Yes, you can I kick it? Arsenal always had black players in their first team in the 80s, such as, Rocky Rocastle, Kevin Campbell, Paul Davis, Michael Thomas. What happened in the early 90s was Ian Wright's emergence coincided with things such as the new wave of being black and British as a cohesive term, which you saw in things such as music like Soul to Soul, or comedy in the Real McCoy, or other sporting arenas such as Linford Christie or Frank Bruno. So I think Ian Wright symbolised something within football culture. He was someone who came from South London, from a working class background, who had a particular attitude and approach to life, but also an approach to racism.
Ian Wright became a national icon for Black Britain, but it was the signing and success of Frenchman Thierry Henry that captured an international audience.
Henry took it into the cosmos in the sense that it became a global superstar. He was of course part of the French team who won the World Cup in 1998. But also he was someone who was such a kind of marketable and branded star. Think of the Renner adverts he was kind of doing, the Nike adverts, all those things as well. So I think him, alongside people like Patrick Vieira and Kanu, who obviously kind of brought in an African contingent, really kind of took Arsenal as this kind of innate connection between black people across different nations into that kind of stratosphere. Spike Lee's a huge Arsenal fan, as everyone knows. I think one of the reasons was because of Henry and his marketability, but also the way he transcended the sport. He became beyond football. And I think in many ways we've seen Saka also take a similar kind of trajectory in his own sense of kind of purpose, but also his stardom as well.
Is Arsenal the coolest club?
Wow. Objectively, I think there are things that Arsenal are doing from a marketing and branding perspective I think is very much ahead of the game, in terms of recognising the ways to reach new audiences through collaborations and capsules, be it through kind of clothing or music. They have quite a few celebrity fans, some which are featured in the book, such as Idris Elba, or Getz, Reggie Yates and beyond as well. Little Sims is a big Arsenal fan. So I think them recognising that and augmenting that has been, a useful thing to have in their armoury.
This man, Thierry Henry, is referred to around this part of North London as the King. His talent, charisma and flair took Arsenal's global and commercial appeal to a whole new level. Remember Va-Va-Voom? But it was trailblazers like Paul Davis who laid the foundations for many of Arsenal's black players to represent this famous club.
Once I finished playing and people were coming up to me on the street and saying, black people, and saying, I support Arsenal. I say, why? And they say, because you, Rocky, Michael Thomas were playing when my dad was watching.
Fast forward to today, and Paul Davis acknowledges the progress made with almost half of the Premier League featuring black players.
Still a long, long way to go in my view. Still a lot of things to be done, but we've come a part of the way, and Arsenal have led that. And I'm happy to be a part of what Arsenal have achieved in that space.
Paul Davis is so central to the book. I mean, there'll be no Black Arsenal without him. I mean, for every Paul Davis who played so many games for Arsenal between 1980 and 1995, there are many other black players who didn't come through, who didn't make it, who was a complete trailblazer, I think, for black footballers in the 80s and 90s. So without him being there and having his presence continuously, there may be no Rocky Rocastle coming through the youth team, or a Kevin Campbell, or a Mickey Thomas, or then allowing for Ian Wright to become what he was. So I think the connection between Paul Davis now and Bukayo Saka, I think is essential to think about how Black Arsenal's always been about the youth team, black players coming through the academy and actually being present and being visible to people on the pitch and beyond.
But an achievement Arsenal haven't managed yet is to have a black person in charge, be it as a manager or owner.
How important is it that they recognise not only in this country they have a core black fan base that resonate with them as a football team and as an institution, but also globally, and in particular in Africa, there's a massive fan base of people that love and resonate with this club as well?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, the book does look at the African continent and the connection between, different nations and Arsenal. And I think it really kind of began in the 90s with the signing of Kanu, which also allowed for other black players from the African continent to come through as well. We saw the Invincibles team had many African players who played. I think African nations, particularly in West Africa, have made connections between players who represent them and Arsenal as a club. So it's pleasing to me to see that Arsenal are doing things that recognise and appreciate that connection they have with other nations beyond the UK. So, the recent Arsenal Africa kit, for instance, I think is massively important for actually kind of paying homage to that supporter base in Nigeria or Sierra Leone or Ghana or Ivory Coast and beyond as well. So, it's really important, I think, that the club are doing things that really appreciate the sport they have, because those nations can't watch the games in the way that we can. So all they have to connect with us is sometimes merchandise or social media beyond as well. So I think the shirt this year was a nice gesture to that fan base as well.
I know many black football fans that don't support Arsenal, some that do to be fair, but mainly the ones that don't, that say that Arsenal's relationship with its black fan base and black culture, it's kind of steering into the realms of possible cultural appropriation. They've seen that a core part of the fan base are black and global as well. And with the kits and the campaigns, they're trying to monetize and commercialize that. Do you have any concerns that the club are trying to capitalise on a core part of their fan base for profit?
There is, of course, a concern that would be applicable to any club, that they are approaching a new fan base or a particular fan base in quite ethical ways. What I would say in response is, the way that I came into understanding Black Arsenal as a concept was through television in the early 90s and seeing black players for the first time and making those cultural connections. Now, Black Arsenal to me wouldn't be the same as a Black Arsenal concept to you or other generations after us. So I recognise now that young people will find a connection with a club or any club, not through television per se, but through social media or merchandising or clothing or music or other things as well. So I think there is a need to recognise that young people now, which the club are trying to augment through their social media content, will still have a similar connection, but through different means. Go back to Michael Jordan, In the 80s, the Chicago Bulls in the 90s, Nike was hugely important for kind of him transcending the sport and him becoming a black cultural icon. A tremendous one as well. Tiger Woods with golf, with Nike as well. So I don't think there's anything different between what's happening now than in the 90s or 80s.
Stars on screen across music, film and comedy openly don the red and white of North London. But equally important to much of the fan base was Arsenal's collaboration with African fashion brand Labrum. Predominantly black with red and green details to mimic the Pan-African flag, intended to represent the flow of people who emigrated from African nations in the 1920s and the art that came with them. That British-African connection is exemplified by no one better than the graduate Bukayo Saka, aka Starboy.
He's someone who gives access to a multicultural experience as well. He's from London, he had a multicultural experience growing up. He's part of an academy which is multicultural as well. So he's important to black people, but we're also seeing, in a similar way to Ian Wright and Henry, he's also someone who is actually transcending, racial binaries as well.
Like Saka, Black Arsenal represents a club steeped in its identity as well as its appeal beyond North London.